Hey guys, tonight we begin with a town so paranoid it managed to destroy itself over bad dreams and teenage drama. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. A place where everyone believed in God, the devil, and that their neighbor was probably working for the latter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Life in Salem was about as exciting as watching bread rise. The kind of town where joy went to die and guilt was the local currency. Picture it. Gray skies, gray houses, gray souls, a community so devout it could probably make a sunrise feel inappropriate. The Puritans who settled there were religious refugees from England, fleeing persecution to establish a world where they could freely persecute each other instead. They dreamed of a city upon a hill. But what they built was more like a poorly lit basement, cold, judgmental, and haunted by the constant fear that someone somewhere might be enjoying themselves. The quiet town that became a storm. You were standing in the year 1692 in a small Puritan settlement called Salem Village in the province of Massachusetts Bay. It is winter, cold, gray, and severe. Snow clings in heavy sheets to the dark wooden beams of the houses, and smoke from thin chimneys hangs low in the frozen air. The town is quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from exhaustion rather than peace. Work begins before sunrise and rarely ends before dark. Nothing here is meant to be comfortable or easy. Life is discipline, duty, and survival. Salem Village is a farming community, not wealthy, not well organized. Its people worn thin by years of failed harvests, disease, and near-constant arguments about property lines, church leadership, and who among them should wield authority. Most families live in small timber houses with dirt floors, drafty windows stuffed with cloth, and little furniture beyond a long table and a handful of stools. Candles are a luxury. Most rely on the dim light of the central hearth, and evenings are spent in silence or in prayer. You can imagine the atmosphere. The smell of smoke, damp wool coats hanging to dry, the scraping of wooden spoons against iron pots, the distant whistling of wind slipping through loose boards. Nothing is wasted, nothing is idle, and nothing is certain. This is the environment in which fear takes root. Fear of hunger, fear of illness, fear of the wilderness beyond the tree line, and most powerfully, fear of the devil, whom the Puritans believed moved through ordinary life as easily as breath moves through the lungs. The devil was not symbolic to them. He was present, physical, active. He was waiting. A village already divided. Before the famous accusations ever began, Salem Village was already boiling with tension. Two large families, the Putnams and the Porters, fought bitterly over land, political control, and economic influence. Their feud stretched across decades, spilling into church life. The Putnams wanted a strict and separate parish for Salem Village. The Porters preferred unity with the more prosperous Salem town to the east. These disagreements may seem unimportant now, but in a world where religion and government were nearly the same thing, such conflicts could tear communities apart. The villagers attended meetings where voices were raised, fists slammed against tables, and suspicions were spoken aloud. Someone might accuse another of allowing cattle to trespass, of stealing firewood, of showing disrespect in church, tiny offenses that became fuel for much greater animosity. It is important to understand just how ordinary and petty the beginnings of great disasters can be. A minister under pressure. Central to the coming storm was the village's minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. He was a stern man with sharp features and a deep belief that spiritual danger lurked everywhere. He was not well liked. Many believed he caused conflict instead of resolving it. He demanded higher wages than previous ministers, insisted that the parsonage house belonged to him personally, and frequently delivered sermons focused on divine punishment, sin, and Satan's constant threat. The villagers were already divided about whether he should remain at all. Meetings were contentious, and every difference of opinion widened the cracks between neighbors. Into this environment stepped two young girls, Betty Parris, the minister's daughter, age 9, and Abigail Williams, his 11-year-old niece. Their names would soon be known across the colony. Strange behaviors began. During the cold weeks of January, the girls began behaving in ways that terrified the adults around them. They screamed uncontrollably without reason, threw objects, and writhed on the ground as if in pain. They complained of invisible forces biting and pinching them. Their bodies twisted into strange positions, and at times they claimed they could not see or speak. When questioned, they said that a dark figure tormented them. Today, we might attribute such symptoms to illness, trauma, boredom, or even deliberate performance. But to Puritan eyes, shaped by fear and belief in the supernatural, there was one explanation: witchcraft. In a world without modern medicine, mental health understanding, or scientific method, the villagers turned to the only framework they trusted. They believed the devil could grant the power to harm others through his servants, witches. And if witches were present, they must be rooted out before the community was destroyed. The first accusations. The pressure mounted as more girls began showing symptoms, and Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and others. Their screams filled the meeting house. Their bodies convulsed violently in public. They shouted names of those they claimed were attacking them with invisible specters. Whether they believed these things sincerely or acted under the encouragement of adults is still debated by historians. But what mattered then was the effect, not the cause. Under increasing fear, the girls finally named 3 women as their tormentors. Tituba, an enslaved woman from Barbados belonging to Reverend Parris. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar known for muttering under her breath. Sarah Osborne, an older woman who rarely attended church. Each woman was already disliked and marginalized. Accusing them required little courage and carried little risk. It was the perfect place for hysteria to begin. When the magistrates questioned the accused, something unexpected happened. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne denied the charges. But Tituba confessed. Her confession would become the spark that ignited the wildfire. The power of a confession. Tituba spoke in long, elaborate stories. She claimed the devil appeared to her as a tall man dressed in black. She said she saw animals, dogs, cats, birds, who acted as demonic familiars. She described a great book, bound in red, in which she claimed to have seen many names written. She said others in the village served the devil too. The magistrates leaned forward. Suddenly the case was no longer three women tormenting a pair of girls. It was evidence of a secret conspiracy, a hidden army of witches working within Salem. The fear that had simmered for years boiled over. Tituba's confession, whether spoken under coercion or crafted to stop her beating, transformed the accusation into something much larger. And once the idea of a conspiracy appeared, no one felt safe. If witches could hide in plain sight, if neighbors could secretly be enemies, if the devil walked among them dressed as ordinary people, then who could be trusted? The net of suspicion expands. Accusations multiplied with shocking speed. More young girls began to demonstrate violent fits. More names were shouted in meeting houses. Warrants were issued. People who once prayed together now whispered that the devil lived next door. Anyone who questioned the accusations risked being accused themselves. Fear replaced reason. Familiar routines, milking cows, kneading bread, mending fences, were now overshadowed by constant dread. Families locked their doors. Farmers rushed through chores without speaking. Every shadow in the forest carried suspicion. Every sudden illness was proof of witchcraft. Every forgotten prayer a sign of weakness. Salem was unraveling, and as more arrests were made, it became clear that the trials were no longer about the truth. They were about power. They were about control. They were about the dangerous ease with which ordinary people can turn against one another when fear becomes stronger than community. But how did a frightened village transform into a legal machine that sentenced innocent people to death? And why did the accusations spread beyond Salem Village, reaching towns miles away? The answers lie in what happened next. The court of Oyer and Terminer, when fear became law. You are now standing in the spring of 1692, as winter's grip loosens and the frozen soil softens beneath the boots of farmers preparing their fields. The heavy cold begins to lift, but the air feels no lighter. Instead, Salem Village is vibrating with tension, and fear spreads faster than the thawing snowmelt that rushes through the muddy roads. What began in a cramped parsonage kitchen with two young girls shaking and screaming has now become a widening storm that threatens to swallow the entire colony. In meeting houses and homes lit by flickering candles, whispers grow sharper, accusations multiply, and the image of the devil becomes a constant presence, more real than hunger or illness. By late February and early March, the constables are busy. Houses are searched. Neighbors speak urgently at their doors. Horses carry messengers delivering arrest warrants hand-signed by magistrates. People who once shared meals now avoid one another's eyes. The community trembles under a weight that no one can clearly name, yet everyone feels. The machinery of accusation has started turning, and no one knows how to stop it. The first examinations. In early March, hundreds gather inside the Salem Village Meeting House, an unheated, cramped wooden building with rough pews and a dirt floor, as the three accused women are brought forward in chains. The smell is thick, damp wool, cold breath, and the sour scent of fear. Magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin preside, demanding answers in front of the watching crowd. There is no quiet. Every scream and convulsion from the afflicted girls sends ripples through the room. The villagers press closer, eager to see evil revealed, eager for release from their own fear, eager for certainty in a world that offers little. The magistrate's questions are sharp, relentless, and built not to discover truth, but to confirm it. Are you a witch? How long have you served the devil? Who torments these children through you? No one asks whether witchcraft exists. They already believe it does. The only question is who serves the devil. To deny guilt is to challenge the belief system that defines their world. It is to call the judges mistaken, the afflicted girls liars, and the scriptures themselves false. And few dare to do that. Sarah Good maintains her innocence. Sarah Osborne, frail and ill, barely manages to speak. But Tituba's confession, vivid and terrifying, feeds the panic. Her words hang heavy in the air. There are many witches in Salem. They fly through the night. They hurt the children at the devil's command. Her story grows more elaborate. The devil appears in the shape of animals, a pig, a yellow bird, a black dog. A book is signed with blood. Witches gather in secret meetings. A tall man directs them. The magistrates nod. The villagers murmur prayers. The afflicted girls scream and fall into violent fits, claiming they see dark shapes hovering above the accused. Truth becomes irrelevant. Spectacle replaces justice, and more names are spoken. Accusations take on a life of their own. Within days, new warrants are issued. Rebecca Nurse, a respected elderly woman known for compassion and piety, is accused, an event that shocks many. If someone like her can be a witch, then anyone might be. The fear that once remained inside Salem Village spreads outward like wildfire licking through dry brush. Nearby towns, Andover, Ipswich, Topsfield, Gloucester, begin hearing rumors. People travel miles to watch examinations, as though attending a grim performance. The afflicted girls, Abigail Williams and Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Hubbard, and others, grow more dramatic in their displays. Their behavior becomes a form of power. Every gasp, scream, and pointed finger can change a life forever. A quiet thread connects these scenes. A community worn down by hardship, eager to simplify complex problems. Failed harvests? Blame witches. Disease? Witches. Livestock dying in barns? Witches. Misfortune becomes moral proof. Nothing is random. Everything has a cause. And the devil becomes responsible for all things not understood. The arrival of Governor Phipps. By May, so many people have been accused and imprisoned that Massachusetts faces a crisis. Nearly 100 people are held in overcrowded jails, cold, dark stone buildings with straw floors infested by lice and rats. Families must pay high fees to keep their own relatives alive behind bars, buying food, blankets, and even the chains that bind them. With normal courts overwhelmed, newly appointed Governor William Phipps establishes a special tribunal, the Court of Oyer and Terminer. The name comes from Norman French. Oyer, to hear. Terminer, to determine. Its purpose is simple, to process the witchcraft cases with speed and authority. The court includes respected men. Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton, John Hathorne, Jonathan Corwin, and others. But their respectability only strengthens the danger, for they share one belief firmly. The devil is real. Witchcraft is real. Evidence must be interpreted through a spiritual lens, not a legal one. From the moment the court opens, its structure is already broken. It allows testimony never before accepted in English law, Spectral evidence. Spectral evidence. Spectral evidence means that if a person claims to have seen the spirit or specter of an accused individual harming them, even in a dream or vision, this is treated as proof. No physical evidence is required. No witnesses who can confirm the act are needed. If someone's ghost appears to you and pinches you, then the real person must have sent it. You can imagine how impossible it becomes to defend oneself. How can one prove they were not in a dream? How can one prove the devil cannot take their shape? In fact, the judges argue that only witches would have their specter appear. If the devil uses someone's image without permission, God would prevent it. Therefore, if someone's ghost causes harm, they must be guilty. It is a perfect trap. Deny guilt, and you are lying. Confess, and you prove the court right. The law becomes a snake eating its own tail. The first executions. The first to be tried in this new court is Bridget Bishop, a woman already known for her disputes, colorful clothing, and outspokenness, traits deeply disliked in Puritan society. Witnesses claim she bewitched pigs, caused illnesses, and appeared in spectral form at night. The girls convulse and scream whenever she looks at them. She denies everything. But denial means nothing now. Bridget Bishop is found guilty. She is sentenced to death by hanging. On June 10, 1692, she is taken to Gallows Hill, a rocky slope outside Salem town. The sun is hot. The crowd large. The noose swings heavily. She maintains her innocence to the end. Her death is a pivot. Once the first execution occurs, the dam breaks. Within weeks, trials continue relentlessly. Confession becomes the only perceived path to survival. Those who confess and name others as witches are spared, at least temporarily. Those who refuse to confess are executed. This creates an awful incentive. Accuse others to save yourself, or stay silent and die. Among those condemned, Rebecca Nurse, age 71, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, Sarah Wilds, Sarah Good. Sarah Good's final words to the judge echo through history. You are a liar. I am no more a witch than you are. And if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink. Whether she spoke these exact words or later storytellers shaped them, the sentiment reflects the fury of a woman facing death for a crime no one could prove. Fear marches forward, and the court intensifies its work. Pressure builds and warps the community. Families are torn apart. Husbands accuse wives. Children accuse parents. Servants accuse employers. Friends turn on one another. The line between survival and betrayal becomes almost invisible. Old grudges resurface disguised as righteous justice. Land disputes suddenly appear relevant. Property of convicted witches is legally seized, increasing the motivation to accuse those who own desirable farms. Enemies are removed not by debate, but by accusation. More than 200 people are arrested by summer's end. Jails filled to suffocation. Some prisoners die of disease chained to stone walls. Women give birth in irons. Children cry in darkness. And the court grows still more severe. They begin using a notorious method to force confessions, pressing, in which heavy stones are piled on the chest until ribs crack and breath fails. One man, Giles Corey, age 81, refuses to enter any plea, knowing that if he does, his property will be confiscated and his children left destitute. So he says nothing. He endures days of crushing weight, each stone added with the command, "Will you plead?" He replies only, "More weight." He dies without a confession, but his silence preserves his land for his family. He becomes a symbol of resistance, too late to stop the disaster already underway. A community near collapse. By September, the trials begin to feel unstable even to those who once supported them. Accusations now spread to respected ministers, well-known military officers, and wealthy landowners. The net has grown too wide, and powerful people begin to fear they may be next. Whispers question the reliability of spectral evidence. Ministers in nearby towns warn that Satan may deceive even the innocent. A number of jurors begin to doubt their own verdicts. The machinery of execution is wobbling. Something must break, and soon it does. But what finally stopped the trials? Who dared to stand against the court? And why did the hysteria suddenly collapse after months of unstoppable momentum? To understand how fear eventually exhausted itself, you must see how the community reached a breaking point, when survival required courage few thought they possessed. The slow collapse of hysteria and the heavy aftermath. You are now in October of 1692, and the world of Salem feels different than it did in winter. The fields once thick with crops now lie harvested, their stalks cut down and left in the dirt. The days grow shorter again, the nights colder and longer. Yet the silence that settles over the village carries a weight unlike any other. It is the silence of people who have seen too much, spoken too much, and lost too much. For months, the machinery of accusation, trial, and execution has operated forward without stopping. It has consumed lives and reputations, taken parents from children, and turned neighbors into enemies. Fear once powered the engine, but now a different emotion begins to creep into the cracks of Salem's conscience. Doubt, not spoken loudly, not publicly. No one dares to challenge the court openly, but whispered in kitchens, murmured beside hearths, exchanged with brief glances across meeting houses. The question no one dared to ask in June now lingers everywhere. What if we were wrong? Growing doubts and flickering courage. The shift begins quietly. The families of the condemned begin to speak out, not boldly, but with trembling restraint. Rumors spread of wrongful accusations, coerced confessions, and false testimony. The afflicted girl's performances grow stranger, more exaggerated, more unbelievable. Some notice that the girls fall into fits only when convenient, when crowds gather, or when the accused challenge them. Others observe that those who confess are spared death, while those who insist on innocence are hanged. Patterns are beginning to show themselves, uncomfortable and undeniable. Even Reverend Samuel Parris, once a fierce supporter of the accusations, starts to feel pressure from his congregation. His sermons, once confident and condemning, become brittle and defensive. People stop looking into his eyes. Attendance at meeting house prayers drops. The community that once feared him now begins quietly to resent him. But the first open crack in the wall comes from someone unexpected. Reverend Increase Mather, one of the most respected ministers in Massachusetts and father of the influential writer and minister Cotton Mather. He delivers a warning that would echo through history. It is better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. This sentence, simple and quiet, is a blade through the spine of the trials. It challenges the logic that has sustained a court. It turns the Puritan foundation of absolute certainty upside down. And most dangerously, it implies that the judges may have blood on their hands. The accusations turn against the powerful. By autumn, a new and terrifying phase begins. The accusations shift to include those of wealth, status, and authority. It is one thing to accuse the homeless, the elderly, and the socially isolated. It is another to accuse respected citizens. When Rebecca Nurse was executed, it shook the community. But now the accused begin to include Reverend George Burroughs, former minister of Salem Village; Lady Mary Phipps, the governor's own wife; Philip English, one of the wealthiest merchants in Salem. When Reverend Burroughs is tried and condemned, he delivers a final speech on the gallows so powerful that many in the crowd weep openly. He recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something believed impossible for a witch. For a moment, the crowd is stunned into silence. Some believe God has shown his innocence. But the judges, unwilling to appear weak, order the execution anyway. His body swings from the rope, while doubt spreads like smoke through dry timber. It becomes clear that the logic of accusation has no boundaries. If a respected minister may be a witch, if a wealthy merchant may be a witch, if the governor's own wife may be a witch, then no one is safe. The court's authority begins to dissolve. Governor Phipps intervenes. The turning point arrives when Governor William Phipps, who had been away managing military matters in Maine, returns to find Massachusetts in chaos. His own family is now entangled in accusations. The credibility of the colony is collapsing. Trade is disrupted. Attendance at church is fractured. Jails overflow. Winter approaches, and the economy is fractured. On October 29, 1692, Phipps suspends the court of Oyer and Terminer. Trials stop immediately. The machinery of death is halted like a wheel suddenly jammed by a stone. But the damage has already cut deep. Re-evaluation and release. A new court, the Superior Court of Judicature, replaces the old tribunal. This court refuses to accept spectral evidence, the powerful fuel that ignited the hysteria. Without it, most accusations collapse instantly. The afflicted girl's fits suddenly lose their authority. Ordinary evidence, witness testimony, physical proof, confession without coercion, cannot sustain the cases. One by one, prisoners are released. No more executions follow those done in September. But the hangings already carried out cannot be undone. 20 people have been executed, 5 have died in jail, and 1 man has been tortured to death by pressing. Over 200 have been arrested, and countless families ruined. The community is left holding broken pieces, unsure how to rebuild. The accusers fall silent. As the trials end, the afflicted girls retreat from public life. Their screams fade. Their visions cease. Their power dissolves. Some marry and leave Salem. Others live quietly in obscurity. A few express regret, though no explanation or apology could ever wash away the blood they helped spill. And Putnam Jr., years later, becomes the only one to openly ask forgiveness. In 1706, standing before her congregation, she says, "I desire to be humbled before God. I was deluded by Satan." Her words are an attempt at repentance, but they cannot repair the wounds. Families demand justice. The families of the dead refuse to let silence bury the truth. They petition the government, insisting on apologies, compensation, and official declarations of innocence. The process is slow and painful. No one wants to admit that the colony executed innocent people. To confess this is to confess moral failure, religious error, and political blindness. But gradually, voices demanding responsibility grow stronger. In 1697, the colony declares a day of fasting and repentance. Judges and ministers invite the community to acknowledge guilt. Reverend Paris delivers a sermon apologizing for his role, though many believe his words are too careful, too self-protective. He soon resigns and leaves Salem. The final reckoning. In 1702, the trials are declared unlawful. In 1711, the colony grants restitution to the victims' families and legally clears the names of many who were executed. Yet the stain remains. The land where Gallows Hill stands lies quiet, and no one builds there. People avoid looking at it when they pass. They do not speak of it in daylight, but they whisper of it at night. The shame becomes part of Salem's soul. What Salem left behind. The Salem witch trials endure not because they were dramatic or supernatural, but because they were painfully ordinary. No dragons, no monsters, no magical powers, just fear, religious certainty, and ordinary people convinced they were doing what was right. The true horror of Salem is not witches or devils. It is how easily a society can abandon reason. It is how quickly justice can be reshaped by fear. It is how neighbors can become enemies. It is how power can hide behind righteousness. And it is how long it takes to rebuild trust after it is broken. Even now, more than 330 years later, the name Salem evokes unease, not because of witchcraft, but because of what real people did when they stopped questioning what they believed. The final reflection. As you stand at the end of this story, you may ask yourself, how many times in history has fear disguised itself as justice? How many communities have destroyed themselves by believing too strongly in their own righteousness? And how many more times might it happen again? If Salem teaches us anything, it is that hysteria spreads fastest among those who are certain they cannot be mistaken. And perhaps the most unsettling question remains. Would we have acted any differently had we lived in Salem in 1692? The long shadow of Salem, memory, meaning, and the slow work of repair. You are now in the aftermath. Years after the final accused prisoner walked out of the jails of Boston and Salem, years after the final executioner's knot tightened, years after the court dissolved and the hysteria collapsed under its own weight. The year is 1693, then 1694, and then 1695. The seasons turn, the snow melts and returns. The fields are plowed and harvested again. Life resumes its familiar rhythm. The creak of wagon wheels on dirt roads, the crackle of hearth fires, the cries of livestock, the slow tolling of the church bell calling families to worship. If a stranger wandered into Salem Village at this time, they might not notice anything unusual. The houses stand where they always stood. The meeting house rises squarely above the center of town. The farms stretch outward, divided by stone walls that snake across the land. The people go about their work with the same determination as before. But something unspoken lives beneath the surface, something heavy and persistent, like a bruise nobody acknowledges. Salem looks unchanged, but it is not the same place it once was. The village that once stood united by religion and shared survival is now fractured by guilt, resentment, shame, and silence. The witchcraft crisis is over, but its shadow will never fully go away. The quiet grief that settled over Salem. For those who lost family members, not to illness or accident, but to rope and law, the wound remains open. Wives whose husbands swung at Gallows Hill walk the roads with eyes downcast, aware that whispers still follow them. Children grow up hearing their parents' names spoken with discomfort, as though death did not remove the suspicion of guilt. The dead are buried hurriedly, without ceremony, denied Christian rites. There are no funerals for witches. The bodies of the executed are cut down, buried in shallow, unmarked graves near the execution site, or retrieved secretly by grieving families under the cover of night. Tradition says that Rebecca Nurse's family dug her body up and buried her near the family homestead, beneath a quiet patch of earth in the woods. They risked arrest for the simple dignity of returning her to her own land. Others are left without closure. Widow Sarah Good watches her newborn infant die in prison, weakened and starving. Her older daughter, Dorcas, only 5 years old, is driven nearly mad by imprisonment. Many children grow up carrying trauma no one can name. People memorize the sound of silence, the silence that falls whenever the trials are mentioned, the silence that stretches through meal tables and church pews, the silence that forms the foundation of years to come. For all the horror that the trials inflicted outwardly, perhaps the deepest violence occurs within, the violence of regret, the struggle to understand what happened. Human beings crave meaning. Disaster demands explanation. And in a world governed by religious certainty, the search for meaning often begins with scripture and sermon. Ministers debate from pulpits throughout Massachusetts. Was the devil more cunning than they realized, tricking the court into condemning the innocent? Did God withdraw his protection to punish the colony for sin? Or did human pride, ambition, and fear disguise themselves as righteousness? Some believe the trials were a necessary purging, proof that vigilance must continue. Others believe the community welcomed Satan, not through witchcraft, but through injustice. But most people stand between these positions, unsure, afraid of asking the wrong question, afraid of discovering the answer. Few can admit the simplest explanation. Ordinary people did a terrible thing. The weight of apology. Official apologies do not come swiftly. For years, the colonial government resists any admission of wrongdoing. To acknowledge error is to admit that the court, God's instrument, was flawed. To admit this is to doubt the very foundation of Puritan certainty. But pressure grows. Petitions circulate. Families demand restitution. Ministers plead with the government. Outsiders mock the colony for allowing superstition to devour reason. Finally, in 1697, the General Court of Massachusetts declares a day of fasting and repentance for the tragedy of the trials. Churches fill with trembling bodies and lowered heads. People who once accused ask forgiveness. Judges whisper prayers behind closed doors. Some break down publicly. Judge Samuel Sewell, one of the presiding authorities, stands in the South Church of Boston and reads a written confession aloud, begging for God's mercy. His voice shakes. Tears run down his face. He accepts public blame. He spends the rest of his life performing acts of humility, refusing honors, and dedicating himself to moral repair. Others, however, including William Stoughton, refuse any responsibility and go to their graves believing the court was righteous. The apology is partial, inconsistent, inadequate, but for some, it opens the door to grieving. Salem attempts to rebuild. The colony tries to mend itself through practicality. New laws restrict the use of spectral evidence. Courts strengthen rules about witness testimony. The legal system shifts away from theological reasoning towards stricter evidence standards, a small but important step toward modern jurisprudence. But repairing the law is easier than repairing the heart. The trials shatter trust. Families who once worked side by side now refuse to speak. The Putnams and Porters remain enemies. The enslaved woman Tituba is sold to an unknown buyer and disappears from history. The church divides. Some families leave the region entirely, hoping distance will dull memory. Salem Village eventually changes its name to Danvers, a quiet attempt to escape the weight of its past. Salem Town retains the name, but the history hangs over it like a storm cloud. Buildings rot, farms fail, ministers come and go, but the memory remains. The community destroyed itself from within. The lessons Salem never expected to teach. Centuries pass. The colonies become states. The United States forms. The world transforms with inventions, revolutions, wars, and philosophies beyond anything the Puritans imagined. But Salem does not fade into obscurity. Instead, the memory of 1692 grows stronger. Historians and scholars study the trials not as a story about witches, but as a story about people, about how fear can override reason, about how authority can be corrupted by certainty, about how law can become a weapon, about how communities unravel when doubt is treated as betrayal, about how ordinary individuals can become instruments of cruelty. The Salem Witch Trials become a symbol, a warning repeated throughout time. During the Red Scare of the 1950s, when Americans feared communist infiltration and neighbors again accused neighbors, people looked back to Salem and asked, "Are we repeating the same hysteria under a different name?" Writers and thinkers use Salem as a mirror, reflecting human weakness and human danger. Arthur Miller's play The Crucible transforms the story into an enduring lesson about panic, persecution, and moral courage. Scholars trace parallels to genocide, political purges, religious conflict, and ideological extremism. The trials become a case study in the dangers of conformity and unchecked power. They remind future generations that justice must be slow, careful, doubting, and grounded, not driven by passion, ideology, or fear. Modern Salem and the memory that endures. Today, the town of Salem is part historical landmark, part tourist attraction. Thousands visit each year, walking the streets where accusations were spoken, where trials were held, where innocent people were led to the gallows. Museums display documents, artifacts, and accounts. Memorials bear the engraved names of the executed. People stand at the remnants of Gallows Hill and feel a cold stillness. It is not superstition, but recognition. Something happened here that must not be forgotten. In cemeteries, worn gravestones lean toward the earth. Leaves gather in quiet corners. The wind moves through bare branches, and the sound feels like a whisper from the past, urging the living not to forget. The story of Salem remains powerful not because of magic or mystery, but because of how common the tragedy was. It was not an extraordinary evil, but ordinary fear amplified by belief, authority, and desperation. It shows that the greatest threats to a community may come from within, born from the failure to question certainty. The true terror of Salem is not witches, but human certainty without humility. Final reflection. As this story closes, take a moment to consider the lingering questions that Salem leaves behind. Questions that echo beyond 1692 and into every generation that follows. How fragile is reason when fear spreads? How quickly can justice dissolve when authority stops questioning itself? How easily can ordinary people become instruments of destruction when they believe they are acting righteously? How many tragedies in history began with a community convinced it could not be mistaken? And perhaps the quietest, most uncomfortable question of all. If you had lived in Salem in 1692, who would you have been? Would you have stood silently, afraid to speak? Would you have accused to save yourself? Would you have defended the accused and risked everything? Or would you, like so many, simply have watched? There is no easy answer. That is why Salem endures. A quiet winter morning in Boston's North End. You are standing in Boston's North End in the early morning light of January 15th, 1919. It is winter in Massachusetts, but unlike the bitter cold that usually grips the city this time of year, an unusual warmth hangs in the air. The temperature has risen sharply from below freezing to nearly 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius in less than a day, and the snow that blanketed the narrow streets now dissolves into muddy puddles beneath the boots of dock workers and children walking to school. The North End is dense, tightly built, and crowded, one of the busiest immigrant neighborhoods in Boston. Italians, Irish, Portuguese, and Eastern Europeans share its cramped apartments and brick tenements. Laundry hangs from balconies. Horses clatter over cobblestones. The smell of baking bread mixes with the scent of salt water drifting from the harbor. The streets are narrow, hemmed in by warehouses, stables, and factories. The rumble of streetcars echoes between the buildings. It is an ordinary day. Workers move along sidewalks with their collars turned up against the damp wind, carrying lunch pails and metal tools. Children in wool coats toss snowballs in muddy alleyways. Housewives step outside to shake rugs and exchange greetings in thickly accented English. The smell of coal smoke curls from chimneys, forming a haze that hangs over the neighborhood like a veil. Nothing in the quiet morning suggests the disaster that is only minutes away. To the north of the Wharf District stands a massive structure, a towering steel tank, dark and cylindrical, rising more than 50 feet high and 90 feet across, dominating the skyline like a giant steel barrel set on its side. It holds 2.3 million gallons of molasses, thick and heavy and dark, nearly 13,000 tons of sticky syrup used in everything from baking to rum distillation to munitions production. Workers call it simply the tank. It belongs to the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, which processes molasses to make industrial alcohol, an ingredient in wartime explosives. Though World War I has just ended, production remains high, and the tank is kept nearly full. From the street below, flecks of rust stain the seams of the tank like dark brown tears. Nearby residents have complained for months that it leaks. Children gather around its base to scrape hardened drips of molasses with their fingers, tasting the sweetness that bleeds through its unfinished, badly constructed frame. Rumors circulate among workers that the tank groans sometimes at night, like a living thing under stress. But no one expects what is about to happen. A normal day begins. Just after 12:30 p.m., the lunch hour begins. Men from the Puritan Distilling Company walk toward the waterfront for coffee. Street workers pause their labor. A group of children play near the Boston Elevated Railway yard. Horses stand tethered near delivery wagons. A policeman leans idly against a lamppost. The rumble of a train passing overhead shakes dust from the beams of the elevated railway. Inside the tank, pressure is building. The sudden shift in temperature has changed the viscosity of the molasses, turning it thinner, more fluid. It pushes against the steel walls, higher and harder with every passing minute. The tank's bolts begin to groan, metal straining under weight. Some say they hear a deep rumbling sound, like distant thunder or the roar of low artillery. No one reacts. After years of war, loud noises are ignored. Something gives way. A bolt snaps with the crack of a rifle shot. Then another. Then 20. Someone nearby later recalls hearing the tank emit a sound like a machine gun firing, followed by a terrible, low rumble that makes the ground vibrate beneath their feet. The steel wall tears open, and everything changes. The wave. The tank explodes outward with a sound that echoes across the harbor. A solid sheet of steel bursts open, twisting like paper. In an instant, a massive wave of boiling molasses surges forward, dark and glistening, coursing down the street at frightening speed. It rises more than 25 feet high, a wall of sticky brown liquid weighing more than 1,000 tons. It moves at 35 miles per hour, faster than a horse, faster than a man can run. The sound is indescribable, creaking metal, cracking timber, shattering glass, screams swallowed instantly. The wave engulfs everything in its path. Horses are swept off their feet, drowned mid-whinny. Workers are flung through the air as though struck by a hurricane. Wagons splinter, their wheels ripped away. Wooden buildings are torn from their foundations and carried like driftwood. The streetcar trestle shudders and collapses, sending metal beams crashing downward like broken ribs. The molasses slams into the structure and bends steel like soft clay. Children who once played near the tank vanish beneath the wave. Men on the waterfront hear the explosion and turn to see a dark tide racing toward them. Some try to run. Many do not make it more than 3 steps. Molasses, unlike water, is thick and heavy. It drags and pulls with the force of suction, gluing victims to the ground, trapping them in a suffocating grip. Clothes harden instantly. Boots fill with syrup. Arms and legs cannot move. To fall is to die. Steam rises from the hot molasses, filling the air with a sweet, sickening smell that clings to lungs. People choke as they try to breathe. Those who survive describe hearing a chorus of voices, shouts, cries for help, and prayers, slowly muffled as the syrup hardens around them. The wave spreads outward in all directions, thrusting through doorways and windows, filling basements and stairwells, pushing into homes and businesses. It takes less than 4 minutes for destruction to settle. When the wave stops moving, silence falls. A terrible silence broken only by distant groans from beneath the thick brown surface. The streets are unrecognizable. Where buildings once stood, there is now only wreckage. Where horses stood, only hooves protrude from hardened brown sludge. Where children laughed, only stillness remains. The struggle to save lives. The first rescuers are civilians, workers who had just finished lunch, police officers from nearby stations, sailors from the Navy Yard. They wade into the molasses blindly, sinking almost immediately to their knees. Some nearly suffocate. Others turn back in horror as they watch people trapped beneath the thick surface struggling to breathe. Molasses hardens quickly in the cold, turning from flowing liquid to dense, sticky cement. Men use planks, shovels, and ropes to drag survivors out. Many faint from exhaustion. Some vomit from the overpowering sweetness in the air. They hear cries beneath rubble, but cannot pinpoint where they come from. Every movement is slow, punishing, desperate. And the more they search, the more they find bodies instead of survivors. Within an hour, dozens of police, firefighters, and soldiers arrive. Stretchers line the street. White sheets begin to appear, each covering a still form. Dark patches mark the places where victims struggled before they disappeared. Time rewinds in the minds of the rescuers. Where were they standing minutes ago? Why were they spared? Could they have done something? What if they had taken a different route? Tragedy reshapes the mind with questions that have no answers. The unseen casualties. By late afternoon, the scene resembles a battlefield. Rescue workers hack through wood and steel. They listen for faint cries. They search cellars, only to find debris and silence. In the final count, 21 people are dead. 150 are injured. Dozens of horses are killed. Entire families are shattered in seconds. But numbers alone never tell a full story. Some victims die in ways that haunt the rescuers for years. A truck driver pinned beneath his wagon. A 10-year-old boy thrown through a window. A firefighter crushed when the firehouse collapses under pressure. A woman suffocated alongside her child, trapped together. In the evening, as lanterns illuminate the scene, the shoreline glows a strange amber tint, the color of molasses reflecting lamplight. Somewhere in the distance, church bells toll, though no one knows what prayer could possibly fit. Reporters from around the city arrive, stunned as they walk through a landscape that looks unreal, like a nightmare poured over reality. They soon describe the event with a phrase that will echo through history: a tidal wave of molasses. But for now, in the immediate aftermath, no one cares about headlines. The only question is, how could this have happened? And beneath that, deeper and quieter, who is to blame? Because disasters do not come from nowhere. Something makes them happen, and someone allowed it. The day ends, but something dark begins. Night falls. Rescuers continue to search by lantern light. Families huddle together. Hospital wards overflow. The sweet smell becomes unbearable, coating lungs and clothing like oil. Sewers clog. Drains fail. Even the harbor water turns brown. The cleanup will take years. The truth will take even longer. For though this disaster appears sudden, its roots stretch back months, even years, into decisions made in distant offices by men who never set foot in the North End, men who saw numbers instead of people, men who valued profit more than safety. The real story of the Great Molasses Flood is not just about a ruptured tank. It is about neglect, greed, and warning signs ignored. It is about how lives are lost when ordinary workers raise concerns and those in power refuse to listen. It is about how silence can be deadly. And so the next chapter begins. Unresolved question. As you stand with the rescuers in the dark, listening to the distant cries fading beneath the hardened syrup, one question hangs painfully in the air. Was this truly an accident, or a disaster waiting to happen that everyone could see but no one stopped?